This is going to be a review of the Chapter 1 information by going through the daily questions. Day 1, we talked about the rules of the lab. You should be able to give some rules of the lab and understand what the rules of the lab entail. I'm not going to go over all of those. You should be able to do that on your own. Day 2, we went over living and non-living things. If you are looking at this video, you could go and look at the non-living and living characteristics. That video is also available. Basically, we need to go over the 7 characteristics, and all 7 characteristics need to be present in order for an organism to be considered living. So the first we'll talk about is cells and organization. And basically, a cell itself is organized into organelles. And organization would also include how a multicellular organism is organized. So in multicellular organisms, we go from a cell to cells being organized into tissues, to tissues being organized into organs, to organs being organized into organ systems that all work together to make an organism. So cells themselves are organized into organelles that all function for a particular purpose, and then multicellular organisms have this progression of organization. Okay, number 2 is going to be grow and develop. All organisms will grow to their mature size. They will also develop. So cells themselves will differentiate, which just means they decide what they're going to be. And once they decide what they're going to be, they have that particular function, like a stomach cell or a heart cell or a muscle cell, something like that. Number 3, homeostasis, one of the big words for this section. And homeostasis just says that you have a stable internal environment. So it can't just be that you have a particular temperature that is regulated inside the body, but it's how does it maintain that temperature. So if we know that the temperature should be around 98.6 in our body. If we go out on a really hot day, our bodies are able to have blood vessels dilate, and they're able to release some of that heat near the skin, but also sweating and possibly deeper breathing and things like that will help to regulate that temperature and bring it down to its normal temperature so that we don't overheat. If homeostasis does not work at that particular time, then you might have heat exhaustion. So homeostasis and the ability to maintain homeostasis is vital to life. Okay, number 4 is respond to stimuli, and organisms will move towards good things and away from negative things. If they don't have that ability, then they probably will not survive. Number 5 is metabolism, and that just tells us that we can use energy. Plants do this by photosynthesis. We do this with cellular respiration. Number 6 is change over time, which is just evolution, the ability to change over time. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. And number 7 is reproduction, the ability to reproduce. There's asexual, which is an exact copy, or sexual, which takes 2 individuals making an offspring. Okay, so that's living and non-living. The next day we then talked about our themes of biology. There are 3 themes of biology. Diversity and unity go together as theme number 1. And unity relates to the 7 characteristics of life, as well as in general cells. Sorry about that. Cells and DNA, and a common ancestor. Diversity really relates to the variety of species that we see alive. So we're all unified. Living things are all unified based on DNA, common ancestors, 7 characteristics of life. But yet we're all very diverse in that we have different characteristics, adaptations, and abilities. Okay, so that's the first theme. One thing that goes with this theme is the tree of life. And it would look something like this. Common ancestor. And then it branches off to show this diversity. And so up here you see diversity. And we have the common ancestor down at the bottom. Okay, number 2 theme is interdependence, which is just a fancy way to say ecology. And important in this section is ecosystem, which tells us living and non-living things that are functioning together. So the living things are called biotic, and the non-living things are called abiotic. Some examples of important things that are non-living would be the sun, water, soil, things like that. Okay? Now, our third theme is evolution. And evolution occurs by natural selection. And natural selection is basically just a term to tell us that organisms with adaptations better suited to the environment will survive and reproduce more often. So adaptations suitable to survival will have a better rate of survival. But they will also reproduce more often. And if they reproduce more often, they are going to pass on that special trait or adaptation, and you'll see that happen more often in the environment at that point. Okay, the next day we talked about the scientific method, and really we spent about 3 days on this. So the scientific method order needs to make sense. You don't necessarily have to have 7 steps, but it needs to make sense. We can't have a conclusion before a hypothesis. We do need to mention here that a theory is made once a hypothesis that has been tested many times. And it's been tested many times, but it's also had the same results. So if something has become a theory, we know that this happens over and over and over and over again. Couple things with a hypothesis. Make sure you write it with an if-then statement, and your conclusion should relate back to your hypothesis with data to prove or disprove that hypothesis. Important things here: control setup is used to compare, and you remove the variable. If you don't have a control, it is not a valid experiment. You must have a control. And when you set up an experiment, you need to have an independent variable and a dependent variable. So independent is what you change, and the dependent is what you measure. We gave lots of examples of these in class. You can go back and look at some of them. You can practice some. You can go online and work with some as well. Okay, and then some ways you can present your data is really just graphs, tables, things like that. Okay, and then the last thing we talked about today is the tools of science, the difference between a light microscope and an electron microscope. A light microscope is more of what we would use in our classes. It's less detailed. Electron microscopes are larger, they have more scope, they can find more things, they are just more detailed. 3 tools used in science. You could name a lot of different things here. Scales, thermometers, rulers, things that you would maybe use, microscopes. And the base units for length, mass, and volume. Length is going to be the meter. Mass is the gram usually. And volume is the liter. A couple things you need to know is if you were to measure something that's really small, you might use something like millimeter, milligram. If you're doing something really large, usually we're going to go for kilo, kilogram, kilometer. Okay, just to have that reference. If you are wanting to do some extra studying, I would suggest looking at these pages and looking at these specific questions to kind of go over some of the things that we have covered and that are very important in this section. Hopefully this helps you with your review, and good luck studying.